Now with us from Seoul is Robert Neff, an author, freelance writer, and historian specializing in Korean history of the 19th and 20th century. His work has been published by the Christian Science Monitor, Asian Times, the Korean Times, Korean Herald, and more, including the Jeju Weekly, which is where I first met Robert about a decade ago, I think. He's also written books about Korea, including Through Western Eyes, which is right here. And he is here today to talk to us about a series of 6 articles that are kind of written in the same vein as this book that's in front of us. And they were published recently back to back in the Korean Herald. Thank you for being with us, Robert.
Thank you. It's Korea Times, not Korea Herald.
Oh, no, but yes, I must have mixed it up in my notes. Korea Times. Now, the series of historical articles depicting the impressions of like Western travelers on specific aspects of the island is rather a fascinating read. I think we both really enjoyed reading it. Where did it come from? Where did the idea for this?
Well, January 12th was Fred Dustin's birthday.
Right.
And so every year I honor his memory. And I didn't want to write an article about the establishment of the maze, which he's famous for. So instead, I wanted to go back and review some of the conversations we used to have.
Oh, cool.
Whenever I went down to Jeju Island, we would sit, eat popcorn and drink grape soda and talk about the history of the island.
Well, here's a pressing question. Where did you get grape soda?
Grape juice. I'm sorry.
I was like, wait, that's excellent.
So continue, you were saying?
So it stemmed from that. And it's a pretty, I go through different series at a time. I'll concentrate on one region for 1 or 2 weeks and then move on to another region.
I thought it was particularly interesting. It was 6 pieces, and what really struck me is all the information they're not large pieces of articles. So I just thought it was really interesting how much you were able to put in. And then what struck me is I wondered how hard it was for you to decide what wasn't going to go in.
There was a lot of information that did not go in. But I tried to keep it to what Jeju's famous for, the wind, rocks, and women. So it was pretty much along that way. Jeju's actually kind of difficult to write about.
Oh, why is that?
There weren't that many Westerners on Jeju. So there were a lot of shipwrecks. And as you know, I used to write about the shipwrecks on the island. But the same thing with images. It's very hard to get Jeju pictures. I don't have that many from, I think my earliest one is 1910 or 1905.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Whereas my pictures of Seoul and Busan and Incheon go back to 1880s.
The articles themselves, even with the pictures you chose, it just keep on, like I wanted to read faster, so I could get to the next picture. Really, really intriguing and beautiful photos.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So about the source materials, I mean, you have like Korean custom reports and Scottish newspapers and books. And you said it's difficult to get these things. How did you come up with them? Were they something you accumulated over time, or was it just, digging through the archives for the specific series?
I've been doing this for almost 3 decades. So I've collected material all the time. Every day I'm adding to my collection. All I do is transcribe.
Amazing. I would like to see your library, that's for sure.
The library itself isn't that big. It's the transcription. My big project right now is a diary, day by day. I combined everything that I have.
Wow.
So that every day, say October 7th, 1887, everything that I have that pertains to that has all been added to this one file. So it's just under 50,000 pages.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
50,000 pages. Wow. So what do you intend to do with that once, like, I mean, I guess it's never going to be done. You're just going to have it for your archive.
I just keep adding to it every day. So, I mean, I'm kind of concerned about what happens to it when I pass. So it's a lot of information gone, and it's done from different angles. So when it's on a date, there might have been 5 people who attended that function, and I have each one of their opinions. And there's a difference between a diplomatic dispatch and a letter that you write to your children. The letter you write to your children is far from diplomatic, and it's usually a lot closer to the truth.
So where do you find some of the, because a lot of these are like, they're written in probably French and English and German and different languages. Where do you find them? If you don't mind us asking.
I have a good friend, Diane Nars. I often mention her in the articles, and she's a specialist on genealogy. I drive her crazy. In the past, before we really had the internet, I used to just spam people. I would, if I found that your name was Johnson and I knew there was a Johnson from Columbia City, Indiana, I would go through the phone book and find all the Johnsons and call them and ask them, by chance, did you have a great grandfather in Korea?
Wow. The dedication. Wow, Robert, that's amazing.
So a lot of my collection comes from personal letters, diaries, recollections, memories.
I think that was these pieces, what you have collected really added so much. Like I said, the articles are fairly short, themselves, but when you're going through, oh my God, my favorite part was reading all the quotes that you inserted into the articles. It was such a cool way to get an understanding of what you were sharing with us, to read it through all these different voices. And I swear to you, I could tell, like, I could hear the way you wrote it. I could hear the personalities of the missionaries, of the men coming through. It was so fascinating to me. It was definitely my favorite part of the articles, excuse me.
I prefer to let them do the speaking.
Yeah.
I don't like to give as much comment. It's not my view, it's their view.
Right.
Now, if there was like not a theme, but a connecting thread through all of them, it would definitely be the sources. You have the 2 Western missionaries. You have Walter, I probably can't pronounce his right.
Stotzner.
Yeah. And of course, you have the State Department.
Charles.
Yeah, I'm going to mess up his name because I'm terrible with names. But Charles, how do I pronounce his full name? Charles Long? Yeah. I was fascinated by the fact that there was a State Department official on Jeju Island.
I also thought that was interesting.
But he's quite who is this man?
He is, I can't even begin to describe him. Others have described him as the untrustworthy historian, or his accounts are often exaggerated, self-centered. He was a very interesting individual, but had a great way of writing.
Really, he did.
But he was also a liar. Everything he writes or wrote, you have to go back and double check. I mean, everything has to be double checked with him. And
were there any lies he said about Jeju that you caught?
I don't know if they were quite lies, but he was afraid to eat the food there because he was afraid he was going to be poisoned. And and he's there with the Japanese crew, which is kind of dangerous in the first place, because we have the Jeju fish wars going on. And I see the book there, Korea Through Western Eyes. I mention him in that book as well, because the baby riots. He was the one that said that when he claimed to be the first person to take photographs in Korea, and we know that's not true, but he said that as he walked through the streets of Seoul, he took pictures of some of the children, and a few days later, the children ended up missing, and they found them in the streets. They had been disfigured, their eyes removed, and it was all of he blamed it on the Chinese trying to get rid of the Westerners out of Korea. How much
Sorry, is that a true account?
There was a lot of problems at that time, but this Horace Allen claims that it was a Japanese man who started this problem by buying a young boy for immoral purposes. The American ambassador, was accused of eating children. The missionaries were cooking children. A water carrier supposedly went into one of the missionaries' houses and lifted up a pot lid. And when he lifted it up, he looked in and he saw a child being boiled in there. It was, the common bogeyman. It goes back to the early 1880s when even in the countryside, supposedly foreigners would come in with candy and lure the children out. But these foreigners were the Japanese. But
right.
So, I mean, it's interesting, but Long is, he's like he's par for the course for the foreigners in Seoul at that time, because he's a Civil War veteran, and there were several Civil War veterans there. He's 45 years old. Okay, his boss, Dinsmore, is 37 years old. Okay. Dinsmore didn't serve during the Civil War. He was too young. Long has, I don't know, he's proven himself in Africa. He claimed to have discovered several different regions that had never been discovered before. And so he is kind of a real thing. I mean, he was a brave man. And so he came to Korea, and he has this younger man that's in charge of him. And there's a little antagonism there. And then he also has a General Dye, who served with the Union Army. Then there's Cummings, who was a colonel with the Confederate Army. You have Graham Lee, who was a National Guard, and he didn't serve with anybody, but he thought of himself as a military leader. And they're all conflicting with each other, and there's a lot of power struggle going on. In fact, Long tries to do a coup d'etat inside the American legation.
Really?
Dinsmore has to go to Incheon to have surgery done. His surgery is kind of strange. I don't know what it was. It kind of made his over-endowed him, shall we say. I don't know what it was.
That's a whole that's a whole nother podcast. I'm intrigued.
I have no idea what disease it was. There were a couple of people though at this time that had that problem. And while he was at Chemyeolpo, Incheon, Long announced to the other diplomats in the city and the Korean the foreign office that I'm now in charge of the American legation.
Jeez.
And Dinsmore is like, no, you're not in charge. And so there's really a power struggle inside, and they both end up getting relieved.
Oh, how long was Long in Korea? Do you know off the top of your head?
From 1887 until 1889.
Oh, so short.
Yeah. Geez.
Short, yeah.
How long was he on Jeju for?
40 days.
40 days.
40 days?
For something like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So my question, I thought it was fascinating. Why was the State Department and why was he coming down here trying to figure out where the Koreans came from? Their racial background.
It wasn't the State Department. It was him.
It was just him.
Gotcha.
Because he took leave to do this.
Okay.
And so he took the leave to do it, and he tried to get another naval officer to go with him, but the naval officer couldn't get leave.
Oh, okay.
So he went down. He wanted to go to Paektusan, but he had nobody to go with him, so he didn't go to Paektusan. But he was convinced that the people of Jeju were actually related to the American Northwest natives.
Okay.
Oh.
So
I definitely need to read more about this man. He was interesting. I think one of the main things I kept thinking when I was reading through your articles is, do you know, did this man have a history of writing? Was he, a journalist?
He wasn't a journalist, but he wrote many, many books.
Okay. Because
he wrote several books, many articles in various newspapers and magazines. He was very, very prolific.
Yeah,
very good.
I know you make a mention of at some point, like reading over his State Department words versus his I can't remember, but like his personal words and how different they sounded. He's a really good writer.
He was very, very good.
Yeah,
he had a flair.
Yes, that's a great way to.
Flair.
Yeah.
Wait, why did he think that the Jeju people related to the Native Americans? Do you know that? Or, does that come up in his writing?
He doesn't quite say, but he says that they're definitely different from the mainland Koreans, and they're different from the Japanese. And he was convinced that there might be a Portuguese colony on the island in the past.
Right.
Was that the secret that they thought there was a secret commune?
Yeah.
Or something that's not the word, yeah.
So I don't know why he thought that way.
That's fascinating, though.
I mean, he hadn't been there before, so I don't know where he got his information from.
I like throughout here, and I'd like to just read this quote that from Long. He's describing Jeju in general and how isolated Jeju is, and that it's not recognized. And he says, hostility to the strangers and an absolute isolation from the world without is the distinguishing characteristics of the islanders, whose names even now is mentioned with bated breath by the ever suspicious Koreans, to whom Jeju is almost as unknown as to the world without. Yeah. I mean, that is just some good writing there.
He was very good.
He was good.
But Jeju to the Westerners was basically unknown. I mean, in the future, I want to do a piece on an early, I think he was Canadian American, or I can't remember exactly, but it was just before Perry opened Japan. And he almost jumped off at Jeju Island. And he was going to teach English. So that would have been your earliest English teacher.
He would have been our earliest ancestors.
Yeah.
That would have been what, 1850s or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad, because we would have probably had a lot more knowledge about what, at least in English, about what Jeju was a long time ago. Because I mean, Jeju was you captured in this piece, and
so well.
I find it very interesting how flippant they are about the people just dying in these fish wars on the beaches. Can you explain a little bit about this fish war was?
This fish war started like in the 1870s, and there were constant reports. Obviously, they originated in the Japanese newspapers, but they were picked up by American and European, of executions of Japanese fishermen on the beaches. I think it was 1874, they mentioned 14 were beheaded on the beach. There was an ongoing war between the Japanese fishermen and the Korean fishermen. The Japanese, Hado and what is it? Mulipo? I can't remember.
Musupo?
Musupo.
Yeah, that's right by where we are right now.
Where they went ashore and they, what's the word? they abused the female inhabitants. They stole the pigs, they stole the chickens, and they abused the women. They killed a number of men, and so it became a tit for tat. And then on the mainland, you had the Chinese fighting with the Korean fishermen
in the waters. Yeah.
And so I thought it was kind of interesting when actually the three groups all met together one time, and the Koreans came out on top.
But it's just so bloody. Like they just clean away the bodies off the. I really wanted to know where these because I live by Jungmun on the beach, and I love finding out where these locations are. Right, like. And trying to figure out, like, there's a description of one in the piece, and I'm like,
God, that was one of my favorite.
That's Sambansan.
Yes.
That's got to be Sambansan, right?
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, sure. He was, where was I talking about? Oh, it was Stoltzner who said it, and he was coming on the boat, and he said, "I felt my heart beat very fast indeed when I discovered such a colossus on a cliff outside Jeju, where the view reaches out over the ocean into the blue distance." Oh, that's just some good stuff right there.
And you probably don't have any way to confirm it. I wonder if the Westerners knew what Sambansan was back then, but that has to be it, right? Like down boat in the south.
Some people have pointed out saying it was. I don't know. I don't actually live on Jeju.
Right. Well, the way, people have to read the article because it's very descriptive about the size of the cave and the length of the cave in different varieties. So yeah, as soon as I read it, I was just like, that's amazing to read about something that we see every day. But that was the first picture of it, it was in somebody's head and he's trying to describe it to us. Amazing.
And because of that, because I had been there and reading it, it kind of helped or aided me being transported back to being like in his shoes, seeing it at that time, which was an incredible piece of writing you facilitated with that as well. Now, just for our listeners, so we're jumping around between all of the articles. We're not going through them chronological or anything like that. It's just
there's a series of 6, and like I said, it rather short, but especially the way you write, Robert, it just keeps you wanting to go to the next piece. And I thought one of the really interesting things was what I quoted from Long earlier was that Jeju was such a mystery to everyone. And you can see it again and again in these quotes that you have inserted into your article. The way they describe Jeju, they describe the women. I mean, it was like untouchable wild that they were being able to see for the first time.
I think I don't have the material with me right now, but I like the way they describe the governors and the moksas on it. They were pretty descriptive. And Long, I think it was Long, and I think also
the guy that climbed Halasan?
No, not him. That's what's his name? Goth or something like that.
Okay.
No, I think it was Long that was talking about the governor was brand new. The governor had just been moved to the island. He had just been assigned to the island, and the people were hostile towards him.
Yeah.
And so he was afraid that they were going to rise up. You also have to remember that there were Sands, William Franklin Sands, who came to the island in 1901.
Right.
And he was there to help quell the rebellion.
Yeah.
Because you have the 1901 rebellion, and the French Navy had moved up and they were getting ready to take Jeju. Jeju could have been part of France. And because of his actions, he was later awarded medals from the French government and the Korean government. But Sands also describes them as the islanders are extremely hostile to the governors, and the governors were walking on eggshells to make sure they didn't anger the people.
And it's interesting that because like when I was reading that, I was thinking about how some of these things, some of these impressions of Jeju or attitudes continue today, right? Like some of the things that still sort of stays in some way is that Jeju people are considered to be standoffish to mainlanders for the most part. They're not considered being very polite. And that seems to be that's like made, in history, right? Because
isn't that true though?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've been on the island long enough.
I actually think, my experience, I've been here for 10 years. My experience was I would get people saying, well, don't you find, cold? Don't you find the Jeju people cold? But honestly, as a foreigner, I never experienced that. But my mainland or Korean friends would say, I just never feel really comfortable there. Welcome. I'm like, oh, well, that's really interesting because I have always felt, well, not always, of course, but for the most part, felt welcome.
Well, especially from Mokpo.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
And Mokpo's not well loved.
No.
So while you were putting these things together, was there something that surprised you in your research?
Well, I mean, I've seen it over and over, so I don't know. I mean,
Right. So this is stuff. How long were you specifically working on these series of articles for then?
Each, I don't know, a day, 2 days.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I was curious if it was something you did over like a long period of time or if you just sat down.
I mean, all the material, I have everything set up where it's done chronologically. I also have my own encyclopedia where if I run it across a reference to cat, I put it under my cat category. And so
you must be so organized.
Wow,
that's impressive.
So it's kind of quick. I also have it set up by regions, and
that's a smart idea.
That's fascinating. I'd love to see. That's awesome. That's
much information.
I just have stuff, right, and binders, and I can never seem to find it. That's wow.
I love collecting information. I mean, I collect information on cost of things, how much the exchange rates, because the exchange rates changed from different ports.
Yeah,
the exchange rate at Busan was much different from Pyongyang. And,
right.
But I just collect everything I can.
I think your fascination of, your interest in information, fascination certainly comes into play in these articles, because for sure when I'm reading it, all I want to do is find out more about, you'll reference one little thing and I'm like, I got to know more of this story. Like your interest in the subject matter really transforms into this article, I believe, and really opened up. I've lived here a while. So I sometimes I feel like my curiosity for Jeju kind of goes up and down. Right now it's more focused on 4-3 and those sort of it. But when I started reading your stuff, I was like, man, I don't even know about this stuff. And so it really inspires, but it also awakens a curiosity that I haven't felt in a few years. So thank you for that. I mean, it is really something special to read your stuff. I shouldn't say stuff, should I? Sorry about that.
Your work.
Your work. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry. No, please.
I think that's something that's lacking, and I've been talking about it for at least a decade. That somebody actually needs to write Jeju's history in English, and I realize that you have an interest in the Sasam, but if I were to do it, I would definitely cut before I hit Sasam.
Yeah.
I would go up to like 1939.
Yeah.
But somebody needs to go and just do a real history, not just dates and short facts, but actually do a storytelling narrative of the history.
I could not agree with you more. Even to your part 6 mentions, you start talking about Halasan. That also, that information, the first foreigner, what you think is the first foreigner climbing and the fight he had to go with the current governor. I mean, all that stuff is just so interesting.
I hate using first because every time you use it, you get caught.
Funny, I was going to say that when I was doing research for one of our episodes, I was looking up the cherry blossoms, and one thing I came across, and I can't remember the name, I believe it was a Frenchman who did a lot of work on the island, categorizing all the different plants and stuff. He said that he was the first person ever to find the cherry blossom trees on Jeju, which it's like, because he wrote it down in English, he's the first person that I can find saying it, but I highly doubt that he's the first person to have seen the cherry blossoms on Jeju.
That's a dangerous, really dangerous title to add to anything.
Now, before we switch gears again, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the sharks and dog fur. What's
with the sharks and dog fur? They're two
they were together in the article about the eating of shark on Jeju as a delicacy, which we don't do. Like, that's what I was amazed by. No. It just disappeared. And also the wearing of dog fur as clothing disappeared. We still wear galot. We still eat like huktueji. We still have a lot of these traditional things that come from, long time ago, but those are things that I had never heard of before, ever.
Well, I included a picture of a man wearing a dog clothing. That's
in my notes.
Yeah. I like the way the man who stumbled across and was like, I'm not sure if he was harvesting mushrooms. I'm not sure why he was in the cave. But anyways, it was startling. Like that was the paraphrasing, this man stumbling across him in the cave.
I didn't, to be honest, I didn't know about the sharks. Mm-hmm. I knew that I was collecting information about Busan sharks because Busan was exporting a lot of shark fins to China, and they were also selling a lot of shark flesh to the local Korean population. And Wonsan or Ginsan was doing the same thing. But I didn't know about Jeju until I started reading some of the articles. That was kind of surprising.
And the Jeju locals were making quite a bit of money, it seemed.
Maybe. I don't know if they were actually making the money, because I think the Jeju Islanders got screwed quite often. Same thing with the oranges. They had to send oranges to the capital as tribute.
Yeah. That was a big thing.
I'm always surprised that one of the most popular fruits. Can you guess what the most popular fruit was in the 1900s?
In Korea or Jeju?
In Korea.
Okay, I'm gonna
late 19th century, early 1900s.
Okay, I want to get this right, but I doubt I'm going to.
I'm just gonna pull something out of my hat. Figs. Am I a winner?
Okay.
I don't know if fig is a fruit.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Let's go. Most popular as a fruit.
It was like God's gift.
It's gonna be something different than you're thinking. Guarantee it.
God's
pears.
Okay, you got pears. I'm gonna go with plums.
I'm on a game show right here.
Very Western fruit, plums.
Canned peaches. Canned peaches from the United States.
Oh, with the sugary syrup, right?
The number one thing. That was the spam of the.
Wow. That's liquid gold right there.
Yeah, wow.
It was. I mean,
if you don't mind, we do want to pick your brain a bit more about another subject. How would you feel about talking about your friends?
Yeah, we're going to take Dustin? A break right now, but we'll call you right. We'll be back to talk about Mr. Frederick Dustin. And we are back. And before we left, I said that we would like to talk with you, Robert, about Mr. Dustin. Now, there's a lot of people on the island who have come here in the last 4 or 5 years since the Jeju International City opened up. And sadly, most of them didn't get a chance to meet Mr. Dustin. And I don't think a lot of people realize the effect that he had and the influence and the legacy he's had on the island. So I thought maybe you could introduce them to who Mr. Dustin was.
Well, his legacy on the island actually goes back maybe a half a century, but he actually came to Korea in 1952. And he was with the military, served his time during the Korean War, returned to the United States, finished his degree, came back, was one of the first English teachers at Yonsei University and did a stint in a number of different universities. He became a gold miner.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he
Wow.
mined gold. He was a fishmonger. He was a newspaper copy editor for the,
Jeez.
what was it, Korea Republic, which was the predecessor of the Korea Herald. He worked for the U.S. government. I mean, everything you could think of. He went down to Jeju Island after, I think, 1968, something like that.
Okay.
He established the maze in the 1980s,
Mhm.
I
And for
think
those-
1989.
The Gimyung maze.
The Gimyung.
Mhm. For
Right.
those that don't know.
He was chicken farmer. That's actually how I got to know him.
Being a chicken farmer?
I wrote some articles about the long-tailed chickens of Korea.
Mhm.
Okay.
Supposedly, the Korean court used to have long-tailed chickens. Their tail feathers were 4 meters long, 5
Whoa.
meters long,
Whoa.
and they were the playthings of the Korean monarchy.
No
And
way. That's good. All
And
right.
the Japanese, this is what they're accused of. The Japanese are accused of coming in and stealing the chickens.
Oh.
And we actually have some records of these long-tailed chickens, supposedly from Korea, being sold in Seattle.
Oh.
Yeah, I even have a couple of pictures of them in 1940s,
No way.
1950s.
Okay.
Supposedly that were brought in from Seoul.
Mhm.
So, and Dustin was a chicken farmer, and so it got his interest, and we started talking.
Wow.
His history on the island is, in fact, the reason why he has the land or had the land for the maze
Uh-huh.
was his part of the deal from the selling of the chicken farm.
Oh.
So he had a share in the chicken farm, and Purina bought it out.
Oh.
And then he got part of instead of paying him in money, they paid him in land on Jeju Island.
Fantastic.
Wow.
And then that's where the maze stemmed from then, that piece of property.
Well, the maze came in 1980,
Right.
89.
Mhm.
Before that, it was going to be a resort for university students.
Okay.
It was tangerine farm, mandarin farm, walnut farm, chicken farm. It was a chicken farm for a while.
Mhm.
Why not? Sure.
A lot of the trees were planted after the trees in that area were planted, I think, in the 70s.
Mhm.
So,
And so how would
we-
how would
go
you
ahead.
how would you describe Mr. Dustin?
Cranky.
That's a very accurate word, I feel like.
Yeah. Very, very succinct. Yeah.
He was a curmudgeon,
Mhm.
but he was extremely kind.
Yes.
He donated a lot of money to various
lot.
functions.
Mm-hmm.
He assisted foreign students on the island. He
Mhm.
provided scholarships for them.
He was the animal
He-
humanitarian before there was any, such
Sure.
thing down here. He was taking care of the cats and making sure there was
Cat.
programs for
Right.
them. So he was
Yeah.
the first one to do that, I think.
Donated money to the hospitals,
Mhm.
schools
university.
all over.
Yeah.
He's honored
Yeah,
at the
and-
university, I believe,
Oh,
for
really?
for donation
Yeah.
money. Yeah.
Mm,
He's
Universities, elementary schools.
amazing. Amazing.
like I always thought of him, and I probably mentioned this to you in text, is when I asked you to come on our show, is that I always thought of him as like the godfather of all of us on
Is there a way to
Jeju.
say that?
It's just because he had a presence, he had this knowledge, and he you could tell that he was such an influential person to the people and to the island. And he wasn't just a non-Korean because he was a citizen, but he just had so much effect here that he was a part of the island in my opinion, like in my eyes. Like even when I left when I went home to Canada after I got married, before I left, I made sure that like I introduced him to my wife and said like, we're going to leave and we'll see you when we come back, just because I felt like that's something that you had to do, with a man, like
get the blessing.
Yeah,
bless
sort
you,
of.
Bless you, son.
And I've always had.
No, yeah, that was it.
I've always had very. People call him a curmudgeon, but I've always had really lovely interactions with him, and he was always so kind to me. And whenever, like when I saw that these series of articles in the Korea Times was dedicated to him, that it's touching, nice to know that people are still writing about him. People are still thinking about him, because you don't, like I said, so much on the island changes, right?
I dedicated one of my books to him and gave it to him, and he didn't respond for like 2 weeks, so I knew he hadn't even opened it.
You're just like waiting.
Just because I wrote it and we were friends didn't mean he was going to read it.
Robert, you just listed off so many things that he did on the islands, not just gave, but what he did on the island. What do you think his lasting legacy is? What would be the one thing you feel really made it throughout the years for Jeju?
That one's hard.
He's done so much, right?
I mean, the maze is there.
Yeah.
Will the maze be there always? I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope that he'll live on through the stories. And I hope that every year I try to write something about him on his birthday and on the date that he died. He died on Children's Day, which is kind of strange but fitting, because he actually did like kids. It's hard to believe. He was definitely cranky at times, but he really liked kids.
Yeah.
And the cats are a great legacy. I think Lucas is doing very well with all the cats.
And for our listeners, who is Lucas?
Lucas is his protege, his adopted son, per se.
Yeah.
And through Lucas's children, Fred's grandchildren, I think it lives on that way. I think there will always be some reference to it. I think as long as you're remembered by somebody, you live on forever.
I like that. Yeah.
It's kind of like what I'm trying to do. That's the reason why I write about so many Westerners who were in Korea 100, 120 years ago, because they're forgotten. They're forgotten until somebody comes and digs up their past. And it doesn't have to be a great past. I mean, you don't.
No, certainly not.
Everybody's got a backstory.
Yes.
But it's good to remember them. And a lot of these stories are dying quickly. The old Peace Corps, we've lost a lot of the old Peace Corps. We've lost a lot of the priest on the island. You're losing a lot of people.
The priest we did. That's a really good point.
It's not just the foreigners that are being lost. When I used to go on the island, Fred was nice enough to provide me with a driver and an interpreter at times, and we would just stop. And I would see an elderly person and I would ask them, tell me a story about this region.
Yeah.
And so they would tell me the different stories, and I would try to compare them, because Korea is losing its history.
Agreed.
The nuclear family is broken apart, and people no longer, You no longer have grandmother at home to tell the stories of the past to the grandchildren. It's dying. We're not seeing that anymore. So history is basically storytelling, and the storytelling is gone.
One of my favorite things about living on Jeju, and I explain, and I write about Jeju in fiction form, and I do my Sasam work. I always tell people that the history of Jeju is like, it's a personal history. It's made up of these, like when I talk about Sasam, I'm actually talking about my wife's history, right? Like this isn't, it's
not so far removed.
It's not so far, but it's also really close to them. It's not like about kings and, all these, like when I grew up in Toronto's history wasn't mine. I could have done anything and it doesn't affect the town. But here,
it's direct.
It affects the history of where where they live. The people that come here, the children that they have, and what they do in the sounds, that actually literally becomes the history of the town that I hear about from people. I know about all the people in the town because my mother-in-law tells me all the stories of all the people in their family and where they come from and who their family was and what they were before the war. And it's
Robert, you'll have to join me sometime in urging Darryl. I've told him this a lot, that he needs to start recording, especially for his daughter, who now is Canadian. He needs to start recording some of the rants that his father-in-law goes on. All these things. He just needs to be hitting record on this, much like what you were talking about doing all those years ago. You just need to have a record of it.
It's important that you keep that. Actually, on Jeju Island, there are a couple of historians and anthropologists on the island, really great, but they don't want me to mention their name.
Fair enough.
But you know them.
Yes.
You know them.
Yeah.
Some of them have published books. And so I think you guys should approach them and get them to, because they are really, really good.
When you were talking about, the dying off of the nuclear family and stuff like that, immediately I was thinking about Joey and his work with shamanism, which is,
Joey's perfect.
Well, we've had him on and especially like his trying to record, because the shamans here on Jeju are the historians, if you will. They have the records, they have the stories, they have the histories.
Well, they turn it into myth.
Right. The myth. Right. And they have and Joey's just done so much work with that, trying to hold it all together, but meanwhile, they're just disappearing.
That's the nice thing about doing this last series of articles is suddenly I received quite a few emails from different historians and shamanist studies and stuff, sending me their articles. And
so cool.
For me, it's kind of difficult because I normally don't write about religion because it's a belief system and I don't wish to offend anybody. And if I'm not a believer, then anything I write it's biased. And I don't write about modern history either because I don't think I'm in a position, especially on Jeju. I don't live there.
Right.
I have no foundation to even think about writing about something like that. So I lurk in the back 120 years.
Well, I'll tell you what, based on your article and getting those emails, I really, obviously it's not something we need to talk about, but I'll send it out there. I really hope there's some more works that you got in your head, like maybe some wheels are spinning and maybe some collaborations. I hope to see some of that sometime.
It would be nice.
It would be.
nice.
Now, well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but we have to have you back on again.
So much to
Robert
talk
Neff.
to you.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
I appreciate the invitation.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. We know you're quite a busy man, so thank you so much.
Thank you.